Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Be the Hope series. We're Tuesday of the fifth week of Lent, and I don't know about you, but this certainly is the lentiest of Lents that has ever lented. Uh, I've been really reflecting on that probably in the past 24 to 48 hours. Just some different things that have been stirring in my heart. But yet, since Lent is not over, we are still called to conversion. We're still called to metanoia. And metanoia is turning from our old ways, turning away from ways that maybe leave us detached from God and turning back towards Him. And essentially, these last 2 weeks, it kind of intensifies. And we get that image in the readings. And the first reading for today comes from the book of Numbers. And there's this beautiful illustration of the Israelites coming to a point of metanoia, coming to a point of conversion. All right, so we know the stories that the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years. They were leaving Egypt. It was supposed to not take 40 years to get to the promised land, and yet here it is taking 40 years. And it tells us in scripture in the first reading today that the Israelites lost their patience. And they started complaining to Moses, and they started complaining to God. And they said that their life in Egypt was better than being on this journey with God, than being on this journey with Moses, heading into the promised land, because they weren't able to see what was in the future. They were so attached to the past, or so attached to things that were bad for them, or things that weren't leading them closer to God, that they forgot what was to come. They forgot the hope that was to come. And it gets to the point where they were complaining so much that God sends this serpent amongst the people. And any time that the serpent bit someone, they died. And it took many people dying from the serpent biting them before the people finally realized, oh my gosh, like, we've sinned against God. And it gets to this point, and there's this line where they come back to Moses, they come back to God, and they say, we've sinned against you, Moses, we've sinned against God. And God shows his never-ending love and his never-ending mercy to the people. And God does the same thing for us. Now, how many times do we get caught in a cycle of doing something over and over and over again that continuously pulls us away from God? How many times are we caught up in things that have happened in our past, maybe? Or maybe we're anxious about the future. Or maybe we are reluctant to listen to the will of the Lord. Or maybe we don't have a childlike dependency on Him. Maybe we like to say, okay, God, I'll trust you and I'll depend on you in this area of my life, but this area I'd really like to take care of myself and do it on my own. How many times do we do that? The Israelites did that. I mean, literally, they did all of that just in this one passage, right? They didn't have a dependency on God. They started complaining and they started wanting to do things their own way. They couldn't depend on Him. They didn't have this childlike faith. They were anxious about what was to come because they weren't happy with the food and the water and everything else they were getting at that moment. They were caught up in still living in the past in Egypt, and they didn't want to look forward to the future. They were so caught up in the past that they couldn't see what was to come, and they couldn't see the goodness that the Lord was doing for them. And that's just a beautiful thing to reflect on, because they finally get to a point where they realize, light bulb goes off, and they realize, oh my gosh, God, we've sinned against you. And the Lord shows His mercy. And He shows hope of a fuller life in that moment. Because the Israelites were willing to accept a point of conversion. They were willing to accept a point of metanoia and turning back to God. Now, by no means that's not an easy thing to do, right? Anytime we recognize or accept the fact that we've been struggling or doing something against God, it's a painful process, right? But with that, with every time that we come back to God, pleading for His forgiveness, we're seeking to trust in Him more. And the more we trust in God, the more hope we experience, the more joy we experience, the more love we experience. But it comes down to us recognizing that we need His love and we need His mercy to be able to turn away from these sinful ways. And there's something beautiful that can help us to do that. If you listened to Jessica's video yesterday, she went through the first 5 petitions of the Litany of Trust. And if you prayed the Chaplet of Divine Mercy with her yesterday as well, she prayed the Litany of Trust. And I actually want to focus on the second 5 petitions of the Litany of Trust because you'll see that it fits perfectly for today's reading. And potentially for you, maybe it's a call to recognize some points of metanoia in your life. And I know it certainly does for me. And you'll see, I'll illustrate how these reflect on the Israelites too in this passage. From the rebellion against childlike dependency on God. Complaining, like the Israelites were doing, isn't fully depending on God, right? It's not being childlike, it's being childish. So we see that the Israelites were illustrating that. And I know that I can get caught up in doing the same thing as well. God, why is this happening, right? Not having that childlike dependency. From refusals and reluctances to accepting your will. How many times do we kick and scream or not being willing to accept the will of God because it's not what we want to do? The Israelites illustrated that. I don't think they wanted to wander in the desert for 40 years. And yet there they were. Their will was probably a life of prosperous from day one. But the Lord wanted to show something greater to them. From anxiety about the future. I know I've had anxiety about the future and in the unknown. Mainly because I'm attached to what is in the past or something that was in the past. And that's the 5th petition I want to focus on. From the resentment or excessive preoccupation with the past. And we see the Israelites were reluctant and still caught up in the past. So maybe those are some points to ponder today. Do any one of those or maybe multiple ring out as points of conversion or metanoia for you? And maybe those are the things that we need to take before the Lord to ask for His grace for forgiveness and have that point of conversion. Because every moment of conversion, every metanoia in our life is a point of great hope for us. And it's a point of great hope for us to live the resurrection more fully, because we are an Easter people. So may the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make His face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift His countenance upon you and give you peace. Know of my prayers throughout the rest of this Lenten season, and God bless.